the fact that they had lived on this fantastic food back in Egypt, which, as I said earlier, I doubt very much, but your mind can play all kinds of tricks when you're in trouble, how wonderful it used to be in the old days. And now they said, you brought us in the desert, and so they pleaded with God that he would give them some food. And verse 11 says, then the Lord said to Moses, I've heard the grumblings of the Israelites. Tell them at twilight you'll eat meat, and in the morning you'll be filled with bread. Then you know that I am the Lord your God. That evening quail came and covered the camp, and in the morning there was a layer of dew around the camp. When the dew was gone, thin flakes like frost on the ground appeared on the desert floor. When the Israelites saw it, they said to each other, what is it? They did not know what it was. In fact, the word manna is a literal translation of what is it? I have eaten manna myself at different times. I'm sure you have too. What is it? And Moses said to them, it is the bread the Lord has given you to eat. This is what the Lord has commanded. Each one is to gather as much as he needs. Take an omer for each person you have in your tent. The Israelites did as they were told. Some gathered much, some little. And when they measured it by the omer, he who gathered much did not have too much, and he who gathered little did not have too little. Each one gathered as much as he needed. Then Moses said to them, no one is to keep any of it until the morning. However, some of them paid no attention to Moses. They kept part of it until the morning, but it was full of maggots and began to smell. So Moses was angry with them. So here, after 6 weeks in the wilderness, they should already have been a month in Canaan. They run out of food, they grumble, they mumble, and God provides them with manna for 6 days of every week, and each day they were to gather just enough to last for today. On the 6th day, they're to gather enough to last for 2 days, because there'd be no manna on the 7th day. And this, of course, is a very beautiful picture. Jesus in John chapter 6 and verse 31, John 6:31, Jesus was having a conversation with the Pharisees, and they said, our forefathers ate the manna in the desert, as it is written, he gave them bread from heaven to eat. And Jesus said to them, I tell you the truth, it is not Moses who's given you bread from heaven, but it is my Father who gives you the true bread from heaven. For the bread of God is he who comes down from heaven and gives life to the world. Sir, they said, from now on give us this bread. Then Jesus declared, I am the bread of life. In other words, when they talked about, I said Pharisees, it wasn't Pharisees, it was the Jews. When they talked about the fact that Moses gave them their forefathers bread to eat, he says, no, let me correct you. It wasn't Moses who gave it, it was my Father who gave it. And it's a picture of the true bread that comes down from heaven. They said, well, give us this bread. He said, I am the bread. So Jesus says that the manna is a picture of himself. And of course, it is a very beautiful picture in many respects. The fact that his provision is new and fresh every morning. There were those who went out on the first day and said, why get up early every morning to come and get fresh manna? Let's take enough today to last for 2 days. And the next morning, when everybody else got up to go and get the manna, they stayed in bed. And when they got up and opened up yesterday's manna, it says it was full of maggots, which may have added to the protein value, but it wasn't very attractive. And you see, if you and I do not have a daily, fresh relationship with the Lord Jesus Christ, we'll get maggots in our spiritual life. It'll get stale and dry. The wonderful thing is, as the book of Lamentations says, his mercies are new every morning, and it is every day that we're to come for a fresh supply of his provision. We cannot live today on yesterday's provision. We cannot live tomorrow on today's provision. Just 2 days ago, on Sunday morning, at the People's Church in Toronto, at the end of my message, I was at the front, and people come and talk about various things, and a man who I'd never met before, and his wife came to talk to me, and he said to me, 7 years ago, I was a drug addict. I'd spent time in prison. I was on drugs. I could not overcome all these demons, small d, but these demons that were dominating me and controlling me, my drugs, my habits, my addictions. And he said, 7 years ago, I sat in my home and I said, God, I can do nothing about this at all. If you're there, would you do something? He said, I had drugs on the table in the kitchen of their home. He said, and that evening, as I was crying out to God, who I'd begun to seek for and I'd begun to sense was there, but I didn't really know who he was, I did not take any of those drugs that night. And I went to bed. He said, I woke up the next morning feeling like a little boy waking up on Christmas morning. So I bounced out of bed. I'd never felt so light and so excited. I hadn't taken drugs that previous night. I went back down the stairs and the drugs were on the table, he told me. And I got a bin and I brought the bin to the end of the table and I just swept them into the bin. I tied it up and I took the bin and I threw it in somebody else's, took the bag and threw it in somebody else's bin so I couldn't go and get it again. And he said, and I've never touched drugs since. He said it was a phenomenal thing that happened to me. And he said for about 2 weeks, I walked on air. Just free, liberated. And I came to know it was Christ who had liberated me. And it was Christ who was the source of this. And I came to know him and to love him. But he said, you know, that great feeling that I had of walking on air passed away after about 3 weeks. And he said, and I'm back to living just with my feet on the ground. I've no longer turned to drugs. God liberated me from that. But I have my struggles. I have my temptations. I have my battles. And I've been praying that God will give me back what I had 7 years ago. He said, would you pray for me? I said, no. I won't pray for you. I said, I don't think God is in the slightest bit interested in giving you back what he gave you 7 years ago. What he was to you 7 years ago, he was to you 7 years ago. God is 7 years older now. Not that he ages. I'll tell you what you need to do. And I'll pray that you'll do this. That you'll stop looking back and say, Lord Jesus, thank you that today your mercies are new and fresh. And today you have something for me. Thank you. And trust him. You see, so often when God gives us some great experience of himself, we try to recreate it. We try to keep living in the good of it. But his mercies are new every morning. I quote that statement to you. It was written by Jeremiah. At the lowest moment in Jeremiah's life, Jeremiah preached for 40 years in the city of Jerusalem and warned the people to get right with God, or the Babylonians would come and they would destroy the city. And they did come. They did destroy the city. They took most people off into exile. They took Jeremiah initially, and then one of the commanders of the Babylonian army got word that Jeremiah had been speaking to the people, telling them that the Babylonians would come. And they said, well, he was working for us because he was undermining their morale, which is not what Jeremiah was trying to do. So he asked for Jeremiah to be found, brought to this commander. He said, I understand you've been telling the people that the Babylonians would come and destroy them. Well, that's good. Thank you. If you like, you can stay in Jerusalem instead of going off into exile. You can be one of the ones that stay back here. You take your pick. And Jeremiah decided to stay. So as they all went off and they watched them go over the hills and off to Babylon, Jeremiah went back into Jerusalem and walked through the rubble, and he wrote his 5 chapters called Lamentations, which means weeping. It was the lowest moment of his life. He talks about the rubble, the